Chapter 9. Invasion of Privacy. Marie continues her teaching and has finished the meticulous work of verifying radium and polonium. By 1908, she completes the book Works of Pierre Curie. During the next 2 years, Marie writes and publishes a 971-page text entitled Treatise of Radioactivity. Ensuring that Pierre is not forgotten, Marie has his picture opposite the title page. In this book, Marie explains everything known about radioactivity, and Treatise of Radioactivity is still used as the most accurate account of the beginning years of radioactivity. Marie's British colleague, Ernest Rutherford, gives Marie's book a positive review in the International Scientific Press, but, just a minute, turn down the music a little. But privately, he can't contain his petty annoyance with Marie's work. Rutherford writes to a fellow scientist, Bertram Boltwood, and he says, "Reading her book, I would have thought I was rereading something I myself had written, supplemented by some research done in the last few years. It is very funny to see the trouble she goes to at certain points to claim that French science was first, or rather that she herself and her husband were first. And yet I can sense that the poor thing has worked enormously hard." End quote. Boltwood is a sympathetic ear to Rutherford's grousing. Bertram Boltwood is a Yale University graduate and teacher at his alma mater from 1897 to 1900. Boltwood is considered an American pioneer of radiochemistry and the first to measure the age of rocks by the decay of radium to lead. He befriends Rutherford, but despises Marie despite his interest branching from Marie's work. He got his nose put out of joint with her when he wrote and asked to compare the standard she uses for radium with his own standard. Agreeing on how to measure radium, the standard to be used, is the coming debate. For the sake of having a precise standard, Marie tells Boltwood no. Miffed with Marie's answer, Boltwood writes to Rutherford, quote, "The Madame is not at all desirous of having any such comparison carried out, the reason, I suspect, being her constitutional unwillingness to do anything that might directly or indirectly assist any worker in radioactivity outside her own laboratory." End quote. Considering the largesses which both Pierre and Marie have given of their time and information freely, his accusation is merely a reflection of his frustration at being told no. As an aside, ranting to a colleague in a letter is one thing, but Boltwood is the person who blocks Einstein from receiving an honorary doctorate from Yale because Einstein is a Jew. He blocks Marie's honorary degree when she later visits the USA. Sadly, Boltwood suffers from depression, and he commits suicide in 1927. Back to the text. Unable to control how the media extols radiation, what Marie is able to control is an ethical guideline by insisting her standard of measure be used to measure radium's strength. Her meticulous writing in the treatise earn Rutherford's remark, "The poor thing has worked enormously hard," he's ignoring the length men have gone to trying to keep Marie out of their science circle. Whether Rutherford knew or not the fabrication of the first Nobel nomination to exclude Marie, Rutherford is certainly aware that Marie is not a member of the Academy of Science in Paris. Rutherford enjoys his membership to the Royal Society of London and will later be president from 1925 to 1930. Marie is not taking any chances that her name and work will be misrepresented or erased in the field of radiology. The continued myth, Pierre the genius with Marie the support, is wearing on Marie's acquaintance from England, Hertha Ayrton. Remember, we'd heard from her before. British papers have continued to credit the discovery of radium to just Pierre. In March 1909, Ayrton writes to the Westminster Gazette and says, "Errors are notoriously hard to kill, but an error that ascribes to a man what has actually been the work of a woman has more lives than a cat." End quote. Her protest does nothing to dispel the error. Developing the processes to work on radium and polonium has put Marie at the forefront of metrology, the science of measurement. This knowledge becomes the core to atomic research, which is what leads to supporting Rutherford's theory of transmutation. Rutherford had thought his theory might not be able to be proved, but now Marie's work makes that possible. Rutherford writes, quote, "Apart from the interest of obtaining a weighable quantity of polonium in pure state, the real importance of the present investigations of Madame Curie lies in the probable solution to the question of the nature of the substance into which the polonium is transformed. It was a matter of very great interest and importance to settle definitively whether polonium changes into lead. The experiment of Madame Curie and de Buren has settled this question conclusively." End quote. Marie and the girls have spent the last 4 years learning to restructure their family. They will need to regroup again. Dr. Curie has been ill for a year with lung congestion and pneumonia. Marie is his constant nurse. In February of 1910, Dr. Curie is 82 years old, and he dies. This is an enormous loss for Irene, Eve, and Marie. Marie writes of Irene and says, "Her pain is deep. She saw her grandfather dead and was present at his burial. She worried about losing me, too, attached herself to me even more than ever. She suffers and matures." End quote. Dr. Curie is buried at the family burial plot in Sceaux. Marie has Pierre's coffin lifted and placed on top of Dr. Curie's. She ensures that when her coffin is next, she will be beside Pierre. During this year, Marie sends a picture of her and the girls to Jacques, and he writes back, "The 2 girls were a pleasure to see, but you look so sad. My wife cried so much when she saw how thin and drained you were. You must rally, if it is only for your children who need you to live a long time." Lonely for challenging science conversations, missing the security that comes with being understood in a friendship, Marie is reawakening her heart. The person Marie has been spending time with is certainly on academic par with Pierre. Pierre had been his teacher. Later that year, Marie, always dressed in dark clothes, whether for her practical reasons of working in the lab or that she has been in mourning, she arrives at a dinner party at the Barrels. Marie is wearing a white blouse and a skirt. Marguerite Barrel, who's the daughter of Paul Appel, who is the dean of the Sorbonne Faculty of Sciences, notices that Marie has a rose tucked in her belt. While this is not an unusual accent for other ladies, it is unusual for Marie. Paul Langevin, Pierre's former student and longtime family friend to the Curies, has been working with Marie to help her prepare course lectures at the Sorbonne. Marie, 5 years his senior, enjoys Paul's brilliance and insights as a peer. Their professional talks turn personal. Paul writes his feelings being drawn to Marie, and he says, "As to a light, and I began to see from her a little of the tenderness which I missed at home." End quote. Marie knows Paul's wife, Jean. Marie has visited their home, knows their 4 children, and has heard Jean's stream of complaints about Paul. Jean's chief grudge is Paul staying within the field of pure research and not taking a position in the industry that would increase his income and afford the family more of the finer things in life. Marie, at some point, has even interceded to Paul on Jean's behalf. Hearing this, Paul shows Marie the gash in his head where Jean had broken a bottle over his head. It is common knowledge within the science community that Paul has an unhappy marriage. Marie has talked with Henriette Perrin, and that's the neighbor who had watched the girls at the time of Pierre's death. Marie asks Henriette, "When you know that a man is one of the most intelligent there is, should you refuse to do what you can to help him?" Marie and Paul's relationship has moved beyond friendship, and she is getting caught up in the Langevin turmoil. The summer of 1910, Marie is away with her daughters. She and Paul are corresponding. Marie is worried Paul will not stand up to his wife and break free. Reminiscent of the time she is waiting for Casimir to stand up to his parents, Marie writes to Paul and says, "If she were to have another child, that would mean a final separation because I couldn't accept this dishonor to myself. To you and to other people I respect. If your wife understands this, she will make use of it. So I beg you not to make me wait too long for you to stop sleeping in her bed." End quote. When Marie has not heard from Paul for a couple days, she asks Jean Perrin to check on him. The danger for Marie is that her letters will end up in Jean's possession. Marie's concerns are not unfounded. When Perrin arrives at the Langevins' house, Jean has the letters and is threatening to expose the affair. In the unfolding scene, the Langevins' 11-year-old son is in the room, and Jean pulls him into the drama. She asks him if he plans on having a mistress when he grows up. Perrin tries to calm the situation. Over the next week, he visits several times just to keep everyone in check. When Perrin is leaving one night from the Langevins, he is shocked to see Marie coming down the sidewalk toward him. Marie explains to Perrin that Madame Langevin and her sister had followed her and confronted her in the street. Jean made several insulting remarks, after which she threatened to kill Marie unless she leaves France. Perrin's continued visits to the Langevins' home resolves nothing except to hear Jean's repeated threats to kill Marie unless she is gone from France in 8 days. Perrin coordinates a meeting to try and bring some resolution to the situation. The meeting includes Jean's brother-in-law, Henri Bourgeois. Bourgeois is an editor of the newspaper Petit Journal, known for being a disreputable source of information. The meeting results in Paul promising to never again see Marie. Jean promises to stop threatening Marie and to not have the scandal go public. The agreement does buy some time. Marie is attending the World Congress of Radiology and Electricity in Brussels, Belgium. Jean Perrin is there along with Ernest Rutherford from England. The use of radium in medicine, industry, and research is making it imperative that a uniform measurement for the element is established. This meeting is to choose an international radium standard. Since hospitals are using radium as a treatment of cancer, they need to know its purity so they can determine an optimum dosage to treat tumors. Following many arguments and accusations, Marie is appointed to, quote, prepare the primary standard, end quote. Marie has this perspective and says, in France, the control of radium tubes by the measurement of their radiation takes place in my laboratory, where anyone may come to bring the radium to be tested, end quote. Aside from multiple languages, ego priorities, and behind-the-scenes science politics, the committee manages to agree that the word Curie will be the term for the measurement. And as an aside, naming the measurement after the discoverer is a common courtesy. Ohm, which is OHM, ohm, watt, volt, farad, coulomb, Henry, and amp are all named after the inventor. Marie is the only woman so honored. Back to the text. December 1910. Marie is offered the Legion of Honor Award. Comparable to France offering the pension after Pierre's death rather than the position of the Sorbonne, the Legion of Honor is tempting bait to divert from the real prize. Marie, like Pierre, declines the award. Like Pierre, who really wanted a laboratory, Marie wants membership to the Academy of Sciences, the assembly that sets policy for science. She has won a Nobel Prize and published the 900-page treatise on radioactivity. One Academy member writes, "Where would the Academy find a scientist with greater authority than Madame Curie to give it an opinion on these works about radioactivity whose number is growing so rapidly?" End quote. There are 3 living Nobel Prize winners in France. The others have been longtime members of the Academy, but not Marie. Marie applies for membership. Reporters covering the story of the upcoming Academy vote are showing up to hear Marie's lectures. Finding fault with anything, they write derisively that her students applaud when Marie enters the lecture hall. Their assessment that Marie's lectures are boring is more an indictment on their lack of understanding the subject matter. Marie will never be the one to point out that the hyped criticism is being fueled by some of the science professors right there from the Sorbonne. A newspaper article tugs on the fear factor that Marie is, quote, foreign-born. The photo of Marie, more like a mugshot, is not so subtle. A quoted character assessment of Marie is based on evidence from a handwriting expert and a physiognomist, which is a person who bases character traits on the shape of one's skull, popular back then. Pulling out all stops, the press is also pushing the slant that having women in the Academy will destroy the feminine ideal and will be the downfall of families. The backlash is not only from men. Threatened by Marie's challenge to their status quo, women are saying, quote, "Science is useless to women." And another quote, "One must not try to make woman the equal of man," end quote. It is suggested to Marie that she withdraw her candidacy in order for an older man to have the position. Marie will not step aside. Bending the ear of Academy members to keep their 245-year male membership intact are conservatives, Catholics, chauvinists, and anti-Semites. Worse than not being pure French, Catholics are claiming that Marie is a free thinker. Add to this, they play on bigoted anti-Semitic sympathies and infer that Marie is a Jew. And this is after the Dreyfus affair. In spite of Dreyfus being exonerated, hatred of Jews runs rampant, and many in France still refer to Dreyfus as the, quote, Jew traitor. Support from liberal papers and colleagues like Gabriel Lippmann won't be enough to stem the negative tide. It won't be enough that the respected newspaper Le Figaro names Marie the nation's most famous physicist. It won't be enough that Marie fulfills the duties of family life and is the one to provide financial support for herself and her children. A woman will never be enough. Marie is making waves by having the audacity to apply for membership to the Academy. The waves are rocking the boat called status quo. Meetings for voting in new members usually garner just 60-some members showing up. With Marie's name on the ballot, all 163 members are in attendance. January 23, 1911 is the vote. The meeting starts with the doorkeeper announcing this: "Let everyone come in, women accepted." End quote. Male journalists and photographers are even allowed in with the members, but just no women. For the first vote, Marie loses by 1. Those voting against Marie are shocked at how close they came to having their male influence challenged. There is a call for a revote. In the next round, Marie loses by 2 votes. Marie is denied a membership to the Academy of Science, and Marie will never again apply. Seeing this close call, members who voted against Marie demand a different vote. This vote is to decide whether a woman can ever be admitted to the Academy. The vote, 90 to 52, decides no women forever. Forever is going to be 68 years. In 1962, the first woman is voted into the Academy of Science. Marguerite Perry, one of Marie's students, breaks the 296-year-old tradition of men-only membership. As an aside about Marguerite, she was a young student and was unable to study medicine due to financial hardship. At age 19, Marguerite applies for a job with Marie. Marie hires her. She becomes Marie's student and receives a grant to finish her PhD. Marguerite discovers the element francium, and she will be the first woman to be elected to the French Academy of Sciences in 1962. Back to the text. One member, Charles-Édouard Guillaume, a Swiss physicist who wins a Nobel Prize in physics in 1920, writes that the vote, quote, was achieved by methods that would make monkeys blush, end quote. Later, Marie receives a letter of support saying, quote, I think you are too noble a character to be affected the least bit by this affair of the Institute, end quote. However, none of the members that support Marie quit the Academy in protest. Marie is at the laboratory the day of the vote. Her students have a bouquet of flowers ready to give her when she gets the call with the good news. When Marie takes the call, her students take the bouquet away so she won't see it. They were so sure the vote would be yes. The Academy keeps their priority of men only at the cost of losing the wealth of information Marie can bring to their esteemed gathering. If Marie wants her papers presented at the Academy, she will need to have a member do the presenting. Marie will not bow to this. While less read by the science community, for the next 11 years, she will instead have her work published in science journals. The professional snub is a tremor to a fault line in Marie's life that is about to crack wide open. Spring 1911, Marie has a visitor. It's Madame Langevin's brother-in-law, the newspaper editor. Henry Bourgeois tells Marie that Madame Langevin has asked him to relay to Marie that someone has entered Paul Langevin's apartment and taken personal letters from the desk. Bourgeois' message to Marie is that her life is at risk and she should leave the country. As an aside, of note for the upcoming scandal, the letters certainly personal in nature. However, no letter is ever made public. What is made public are out-of-context selected sentences with the wording having been altered. Back to the text. Marie goes to Jean Perrin with the latest development. Perrin takes the threat seriously since he has witnessed the evidence of bruises from previous encounters that Paul has suffered from his wife. In one instance, Madame Langevin, her mother, and sister throw an iron chair at Paul. The Perrins inform Paul that his wife is no longer welcome at their house. And he says, your wife has recently made threats of murder serious enough so that we all have been afraid that she is capable of acting on them, end quote. Perrin is tired of the never-ending drama and advises Marie she should leave town. The situation is quiet for 8 months. Marie does have the opportunity to leave town temporarily. Émile Borel, French mathematician, and his wife Marguerite Borel, who noticed the flower tucked in Marie's belt, they invite Marie and her daughters to go with them for a science conference in Italy. Marie and Émile attend the conference while Marguerite spends time with Irene and Eve. One of the evenings in Italy, Marie talks to Marguerite privately. It can be understood that some of Marie's concerns is self-serving, but she is in love with Paul because she is in love with Paul, But Marie is equally concerned about science. Marie explains that she is afraid Paul will succumb to his wife's demand to leave science and earn more money in industry. Marie tells Marguerite, "Save him from himself. He is weak. You and I are tough. He needs understanding. He needs gentleness and affection." End quote. Marguerite records this conversation later, and she writes about Marie, quote, "Under the austere scientist was a tender and lively woman capable of walking through fire for those she loves." Back in Paris, Langevin is spending nights at the parents' home. When he discovers one of his sons is ill, Paul goes home. A fight starts between Paul and his wife. Madame Langevin threatens to expose the letters. Paul, who had been planning a trip to London with his two sons, leaves immediately. This action plays into Madame Langevin's hand, and she charges Paul with abandoning his home and taking their sons. The strain on friendships continues with the circle of scientists when Marie's assistant, de Buren, meets with Marguerite and asks her to speak with Paul and tell him to put an end to his relationship with Marie. De Buren tells Marguerite, "He is worrying her. She can't bear to see him so despondent." Marguerite tells de Buren that Langevin complains of these things to her, too. De Buren replies, quote, "Complaining to you is not as dangerous." End quote. De Buren will also confront Langevin directly. He blames Paul for Marie's bad health, distraught emotions, and not being able to concentrate on her daughters. They argue. As an aside, there is also the quiet quandary of some of Marie's male colleagues. How can they defend or advise Marie when they have mistresses of their own? Back to the text. Marie sends the girls to Poland to stay with Bronya and Casimir. Marie will join them, but first she goes to Holland. Marie is there to meet a physicist, his last name's Onnes, O-N-N-E-S, who studies how radioactive bodies behave at very low temperatures. Onnes is awarded a Nobel Prize for Physics in 1913. Marie and the girls enjoy a stay with family in Poland. Eve, an energetic 6-year-old, can keep up on long hikes, and Marie writes, "Eve, very much adored by everybody and very happy. She goes into the mountains with us. She bears up well and walks well. She carries her backpack and is very happy with the excursion and the camping." Marie describes Eve's sensitive side and says, "I had just reproached Irene for I don't know what, and Eve dissolved into tears." End quote. Irene, in typical 14-year-old fashion, informs her mother that she loves Poland, the countryside, and the people and the language, but she makes it clear she likes France more. Marie leaves in October for Brussels for a veritable who's who gathering of the top physicists in the world. It's the first Solvay conference. Marie's colleagues/friends are there. Jean Perrin, who Nobel Prize in Physics 1926. Ernest Rutherford is there, who won a Nobel Prize in Chemistry 1908. Amidst the attendees, along with Max Planck, who won a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918. There is a new kid on the block, Albert Einstein, who won a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921. The group also includes Paul Langevin. And as an aside about the Solvay conference, it's by invitation only, and it was established by a Belgian industrialist, Conseil Solvay. The conference is devoted to preeminent open problems in physics and chemistry. The subject of this first conference is radiation and the quanta. Back to the text. Aside from scientific discussions about beta rays, meetings are also to decide where to keep the official international unit of radium, the Curie. Since it is Marie who discovered radium, and Marie produced the sample now being used as the standard, she sees no problem with keeping the radium permanently in her laboratory. Protests erupt. Others explain the small sample should be kept at the Office of Weights and Measurements at Severs. Rutherford attempts to explain, quote, "I am sure it is going to be ticklish business to get the matter arranged satisfactorily, as Madame Curie is rather a difficult person to deal with. She has the advantage and at the same time the disadvantage of being a woman." And if you hear the snoring again in the background, that's my dog taking an afternoon nap. Back to the text. Marie leaves several meetings complaining of headaches and exhaustion. Whether Marie's ailments are in light of the personal turmoil she is experiencing or not, these confrontations with colleagues are a cakewalk compared to what is coming. The media has been brewing, and an unnamed Sorbonne academician is stirring the pot. And he writes, "Madame Curie, since the death of her illustrious husband, has not accomplished anything by herself. She has stood by the wayside while others are unraveling the mysteries of the atom." And in another paper, it's stated, quote, "The recent work of the Curie laboratory illustrates the absence of true innovation. It is busy work," end quote. Marie's busy work, obtaining pure samples of radium and polonium, is a scientific feat no one else could achieve. There is no acknowledgement for finishing the book about Pierre's work and her 900-plus page treatise that she has published on radiation, a text that is still used today. November 4th, Marie is attending the Solvay conference. As she crosses the hotel lobby, reporters are waving newspapers in front of her and shouting questions. Marie doesn't understand the confusion until one reporter shoves the paper in front of her, and the headline reads, "A Love Story, Madame Curie and Professor Langevin." Marie is stunned. She turns and leaves. Accusing Marie of being a husband snatcher, the article reads, quote, "The fires of radium, which so mysteriously warms everything around them, had a surprise in store for us. They have just kindled a blaze in the hearts of the scientists who are studying their behavior with such tenacity, and the wife and children of one of these scientists are in tears," end quote. The article's source is an interview with Madame Langevin's mother, who is falsely claiming no one knows where the, quote, lovers are at this time. A picture of Marie is featured in the newspaper, but the article fails to have a picture of Paul. Marie responds to the article with a letter to a reputable newspaper. Aside from the accusations being false, Marie points out that anyone in Paris knows she is in Belgium for the Solvay conference. Marie stays at the conference. It's November 7th, Marie's 44th birthday. She is handed a telegram. As she opens the message, is she filled with trepidation for what might be another announcement of bad news? She can breathe a sigh of relief. She reads, "You have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry." Letter follows. Marie is being honored for, quote, "producing sufficiently pure samples of polonium and radium to establish their atomic weights, facts confirmed by other scientists, and for her feat of producing radium as pure metal," end quote. This second Nobel Prize is in her name alone. Marie is the only person to date to receive 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different categories of science. The Paris papers hardly mention that Marie is awarded a second Nobel Prize. The glory of this honor is crushed with the priority for scandal. Marie returns to Paris, and the drama is both public and private. Excuse me. Timing for the story to break cannot be worse. Technology upgrades, linotype, The electric telegraph, telephones, and photos have reporters busier than ever, stirring up a need to know for their reader in order to sell more papers. Ravenous after the feeding frenzy of the Dreyfus affair, reporters are quick to latch onto another storyline that always sells: adultery. And for masses of people in marginal lives, readers relished the theme: how the mighty have fallen. No matter that Marie never wanted to be mighty. Another square the story fits is Marie, not Paul, being a foreigner. Xenophobia, the unreasonable fear and hatred of foreigners, is in full swing with the Langevin affair. A journalist writes, quote, "France in the grip of the bunch of dirty foreigners who pillage it, soil it, and dishonor it," end quote. And considering the number of papers sold with the character assassination of the Dreyfus affair, anti-Semitism is also always a popular twist, and the rumor is reignited that Marie is a Jew. Another publication hits the stand with the title, "The Truth About the Langevin Curie Scandal for a Mother," end quote. The choice of color for the cover is red. Following this is a gossip paper with an article that is filled in with quotes and accusation from Madame Langevin. Marie is portrayed as, quote, "the Vestal Virgin of Radium, who deliberately, methodically, scientifically set about alienating Paul Langevin from his wife and separating her and her children." The media incitement has its effects. Crowds are circling around Marie's home every day. They are throwing stones at the windows and shouting, "Get out, foreigner," and "Husband snatcher," and "Go home to Poland." As an aside, a silent double standard. The crowds do not go to Paul's house to condemn him, nor are any quotes, warped or otherwise, released from his letters to Marie. Only the quotes from Marie's letters to Paul. Back to the text. One more article appears, this time printed in the La Petite Journal, where Madame Langevin's brother-in-law is the editor. The headline reads, "A novel in a laboratory, the affair of Madame Curie and Monsieur Langevin." Madame Langevin gives details of the last fight, and she says it was, quote, "over a badly made fruit compote," end quote, and that Monsieur Langevin became violent. He hit her and then disappeared with two of their sons. In reference to the letters, Madame Langevin is outraged that Marie Curie has suggested Paul break off his marriage. In this orchestrated story, Madame Langevin proclaims she is still hoping her husband will return. Carefully playing to the reader's sympathies, there is no mention that Madame Langevin knew Paul went to London with the boys, and nothing is said of the previous violence to Paul on her part. And finally, the article plays to its readers and upholds society standards by ensuring the point of contention is not that her husband has a mistress. Paul, in line with the status quo of the day, had mistresses in the past. The wife's role is to tolerate these indiscretions as long as the husband sticks by the rules of the game. One rule is a mistress is not supposed to break up a marriage. Another rule is the mistress is supposed to be a shadow in the world of society. Paul and Marie are breaking these rules. And the egregious letters? What is written? Here are some excerpts from Marie's letters. A quote. "There are very deep affinities between us which only required a fertile piece of ground in order to develop. We sometimes sensed this in the past, but we did not become fully aware of it until we found ourselves face to face with each other at a time when I was mourning the beautiful life I had made for myself, and you had the feeling you had completely lacked this sort of family life." Or she writes, "My Paul, I embrace with all my tenderness." Or here, It would be so good to gain the freedom to see each other as much as our various occupations permit, to work together, to talk, or to travel together when conditions lend themselves." End quote. And Marie reminds Paul of the risk that she is taking when she says, "Think of that, my Paul, when you feel so invaded by fear of wronging your children, they will never risk as much as my poor little girls, who become orphans between one day and the next if we don't arrive at a stable solution." End quote. Written by a woman in love? Yes. Advice written by a caring friend? Yes. An accusatory letter to the editor in the newspaper leads to a challenge to Langevin, and this leads to a duel. While the duel comes to nothing, the firestorm continues. Counter-accusations to the slanderous articles come from Emile Borel. He points out that Madame Langevin knew all along that Monsieur Langevin and the two sons were in England, or that Paul was staying with the Borels. While this is supportive of Marie, the publicity is about to strike at Marie's Achilles heel. The rumor mill is churning out the spin that Marie and Paul, while teaching at the same school, that they were involved when Pierre was still alive. This leads to the suggestion that Pierre's death was a purposeful act. It is a loud whisper in the grapevine that Pierre, in despair over his love betrayed, purposely threw himself in front of the horse cart. Jacques tries to stop the nonsense and writes to the press to make clear that Marie and his brother Pierre were truly in love and that he sees Marie as his sister. Marie writes to the paper, quote, "I find all these intrusions of the press and the public into my private life abominable. This is why I am going to take strong action against the publication of any documents attributed to me. Also, I have a right to demand large sums of money in reparation, and I will use this money in the interests of science." End quote. At this point, the reporter, who first exposed the story, sends a letter to Marie and apologizes. He admits using unreliable sources, and he writes, "Madame, I am filled with despair, and I offer you my humblest apologies. I was relying on similar information from different sources when I wrote the article that you know about. I was wrong, and now I can hardly understand how my professional enthusiasm could have led me to commit such a detestable act. I am left with only one consoling thought, that such a humble journalist as I am could never, by any of his writings, tarnish the glory that halos you, nor the esteem that surrounds you. Your very distressed, Fernand Hauser." The story will be retracted, but the damage is done. The public, quick to vilify, is not willing to step into the age of enlightenment and see that they are wrong. When one article makes headlines, Marguerite Borel and de Buren go to Marie's house to bring Marie and her daughters back to the Borels' apartment for privacy. Arriving at Marie's house, there is a mob at the gate. Marie and Eve are hurried out to the car. Irene is at school, and a friend has already shown Irene the newspaper. De Buren goes to the school and brings Irene to the Borels' home as well. The Sorbonne is under public pressure to remove Marie from her position. What the Sorbonne is bowing to is one of the paper headlines asking, quote, "Will Madame Curie remain a professor at the Sorbonne?" The article justifies its query and writes, "As is our custom, we would have said nothing about this if it involved only the private lives of the people concerned. But something more is involved here. Madame Curie occupies a public teaching position which she obtained in circumstances that give public opinion the right to form a judgment, and her students and their families the right to demand that the teacher be what the English call, quote, respectable," end quote. When the Minister of Education hears Marie is staying with the Borels, he is furious. Emile Borel has the apartment as part of his teaching position at the Sorbonne. The minister tells Borel he is discrediting the Sorbonne and he threatens to fire him if he persists. Borel replies, quote, "All right, I persist." The minister backs down and gives Borel time to think about it. Other men are staunch allies and friends for Marie. Gabriel Lippmann stands by Marie, and for this he is labeled the Jew of color photography. John Perrin will defend Marie, and he is tagged, quote, "a fanatic Dreyfusard." Again, going back to the Jewish thing. In the meantime, Emile's wife, Marguerite, has gotten a message from her father to come at once. Again, reminder, Marguerite's father is Paul Appel, and he is the dean of the Sorbonne's Faculty of Science. He was Marie's doctoral advisor and part of the effort to deny Marie the first Nobel Prize, and he was the one, though, to notify Marie of Pierre's death. So these people are close. I mean, this isn't just somebody he's not close to. I mean, he's known her for years. Anyway, Marguerite is under the impression her father wants to meet and be sympathetic to Marie's situation. She is wrong. When Marguerite comes into the room, her father is putting on his shoes, and he pauses to tell his daughter that she cannot have Marie stay at her place. He states that it is ruining the reputation of the Sorbonne. When Marguerite argues, Appel gets angry and recounts his previous support of Marie. He's the one that put forward her name for the membership to the Academy, and he adds, "But I cannot hold back the flood now engulfing her," end quote. Appel informs his daughter that he is going to fire Marie from her position of chair. He wants Marie to resign from the Sorbonne and return to Poland. He has backed this position the day before with a group of Sorbonne professors who were demanding that Marie leave France. Marguerite knows this is only happening because Marie is a woman. No one is gathering at Langevin's house to throw stones at him because boys will be boys, and they are not going to be held accountable to the same standard as girls. Does Marguerite remind her father there is a history professor at the Sorbonne who is having an affair with the wife of a high official? Nothing is done to him. There is a professor in the Polytechnique sleeping with the wife of the mathematician. Nothing is done to him, nor are these scandals unusual. Parisian courts register 39 declarations of adultery every day, and 24 of every 100 births in Paris, so that's 1/4 of the births in Paris, are illegitimate. Einstein has an illegitimate child, presumably put up for adoption, and has an affair with his cousin Elsa, divorces his wife and marries Elsa. Is there any moral outrage? If society wants to make Marie an outcast, Marguerite will not. Marguerite sees Marie as an emancipated woman. Marie, providing her own financial support, isn't chasing Paul for money. Marie's letter reveals a woman of passion, which is the other element that shakes tradition. Women who are wives are respectable, not passionate. Passionate is the job of a prostitute. Later, when Marguerite is asked if she associates with this type of woman, Marguerite responds unabashedly, quote, "We associate with her to such an extent that she lives with us, yes, at the school." Marguerite begs her father to not go through with his plan. When Appel refuses, Marguerite tells him, quote, "If you give in to that idiotic nationalist movement and insist that Marie should leave France, you will never see me again," end quote. Appel, who still hasn't put on his shoes, is so exasperated he throws his shoe at the wall, but he concedes to his daughter's threat. By November 16th, Marie's lawyer convinces the French press to hold off on any further articles. The only paper who does not comply is, it's called The Action of France. This is the same paper that churned out the attack on Captain Dreyfus. Their bigotry includes Protestants, Jews, Freemasons, the liberal intelligentsia, and scientists. A Voice of Reason is in an editorial in the New York Times. It is a rebuttal to the insinuation that Marie's actions have tarnished science and the Sorbonne, and the article states, quote, assailed by a jealous woman who accuses her of estranging a husband from wife and children, there are hints of deliberate mischief-making in the case. The letters quoted by Madame Langevin's complaint may not be genuine. In any case, neither science nor the Sorbonne can suffer at all from social scandals affecting the lives of scientists. Madame Langevin's demands include full custody of the children and to be paid 1,000 francs a month, or she will give the letters to the newspapers. When Paul refuses, she charges him with, quote, consorting with a concubine, end quote. Although Marie is not specifically named, the charge means the case will be heard in a criminal court, which means more publicity. Marie's bank accounts during these months show large sums of money being given to Paul. It is possible Jean is blackmailing him. Bronya, Hella, and Joseph arrive from Poland to give Marie their support. They are encouraging Marie to come back to Poland. Paderewski, the Polish pianist, also comes to visit Marie. Charles Edouard Guillaume writes to Marie and he says, we share your sadness and your joys. We were with you during the painful days you have just gone through. We are still with you. There are people who cannot forgive your superiority. They provided it during your presentation at the Academy. The same base jealousy has animated them again. The campaign the last few days is proof that the same people have not given up. Albert Einstein writes to Marie and he says that he is so incensed over the way in which the rabble dares to react to you that I absolutely had to vent these feelings. I am convinced, however, that you hold the rabble in contempt, whether they feign reverence or seek to satisfy their lust for excitement through you. I feel the need to tell you how much I have come to admire your spirit, your energy, and your honesty. I consider myself fortunate to have made your personal acquaintance in Brussels. I will always be grateful that we have among us people like you, as well as Langevin, genuine human beings in whose company one can rejoice. If the rabble continues to be occupied with you, simply stop reading the drivel. Leave it to the vipers it was fabricated for. With cordial regards to you, Langevin and Perrin, A. Einstein. In a letter to a friend, Einstein's sentiments are somewhat modified, and he writes about Marie that, quote, Marie isn't attractive enough to become dangerous for anyone, end quote. George Urbain, a Sorbonne professor, expresses some understanding when he writes to a fellow scientist, quote, in Madame Curie's letter to Langevin, who was so unhappy at home, she gives him advice on how to free himself. I think that Perrin or myself could have given him the same advice, but the fact that it was given by a woman and that the woman used affectionate terms are a sign of guilt in the eyes of the world. I'm sorry, there was a boom here. Let me keep reading. I'm very sorry about the general cowardice I see among Marie Curie's greatest admirers are those who throw stones at her today. Marie, under the barrage of character assassination shots, is unsure she will survive. She writes to George Goyer, who is Pierre's confidant, and asks for his help to plan for the disposition of her affairs. Goyer responds to Marie, needless to say, you can count on me to follow all the recommendations you will make, but the time will not come for that, and you will live long enough to arrange everything as you deem right. Perrin and then writes, I witnessed the emotion that this produced on Madame Curie, an emotion so powerful that we feared for her life. Marie is 44. Unbeknownst to Marie, there are members from the Nobel Committee suggesting that Marie not come to Stockholm the next month to receive the prize. Their reason, thoughtful of course, is to spare Marie's embarrassing herself or the king, and one writes, quote, "It would be very desirable that Madame Curie should not come to Stockholm to receive the prize from the hand of King Gustav. It could bring a lot of unpleasantness to the Academy and science, and mostly to herself." End quote. Paul Langevin steps in with a letter to those pressuring Marie to not attend the Nobel Prize ceremony, and he writes, quote, "One cannot judge the correspondence which is reproduced in a distorted fashion by alterations and omissions if one does not know the condition in which I lived for 13 years, nor from what kind of people these attacks came. It hurts me to have to shout with all my strength that such a woman did not do what she is accused of." End quote. As an aside, as for the relationship between Marie and Pierre and Paul Langevin, any romantic interest is over. They will remain friends and professional colleagues the rest of their lives. Paul later has a separation decree from his wife, although he will return to her in a few years. One of his students, Eliane Montel, becomes his mistress, and Paul asks Marie to help Eliane have a position at the laboratory. Marie does. Paul has a son by Eliane named Paul Gilbert. In an interesting twist of history, Marie's granddaughter, Irene's daughter Helene, marries Michael Langevin, a grandson to Paul. The two grandchildren are unaware of the scandal until late in life. Small world. Back to the text. Marie receives the no attendance request letter from the Academy, and that the Academy has denied Marie's membership. They want Marie to worry about, quote, their esteem. She reads, quote, "All my colleagues replied that they do not want you to come here on December 10th. I, too, beg you to stay in France, because nobody can predict what could happen during the prize giving. The honor, the esteem for our Academy, as well as for science, and for your fatherland, seem to demand that under such circumstances you abandon the idea of coming here to get the prize." End quote. So this was sent to her by the Academy of Sciences. Back to the text. Even in her weakened state, Marie will not be cowed. She writes back, quote, "You suggest to me that the Academy of Stockholm, if it had been forewarned, would probably have decided not to give me the prize. Unless I could publicly explain the attacks of which I have been the object, I must therefore act according to my conviction. The action that you advise would appear to be a grave error on my part. In fact, the prize has been awarded for discovery of radium and polonium. I believe that there is no connection between my scientific work and the facts of my private life. I cannot accept the idea in principle that the appreciation of the value of scientific work should be influenced by libel and slander concerning my private life. I am convinced that this opinion is shared by many others." Bronya and Irene, who's 14, accompany Marie for the 48-hour trip to Sweden. Although confident her decision is correct, Marie does have reason to wonder what will happen. Marie is greeted with a warm reception, complete with respect and affection. The Swedish Association of University Women hosts a banquet in Marie's honor. 300 women attend. During the Nobel Prize ceremonial speeches, the extraordinary accomplishment of Marie is mentioned. Quote, "During the 11 years in which Nobel Prizes have been awarded, this is the first time that distinction has been conferred upon a previous prize winner." End quote. Any fears of causing embarrassment are unfounded. King Gustav awards the prize to Marie, and she becomes the first woman to address the Nobel Academy. Among the society women with their gowns and jewels, Marie is in her usual subdued black dress. She gives her lecture, which is entitled Radium and the New Concept in Chemistry. End quote. Marie honors her fellow scientists, giving credit to those that helped her: Becquerel, Rutherford, Soddy, de Buren, and even Boltwood. Marie includes praise of Pierre, but she makes it clear that she alone carried out the significant discoveries. Marie makes clear who discovered these elements and who created and performed the process to isolate these elements as proof of her hypothesis. She uses throughout her speech, I called, I used, I carried out, I found, I obtained. Sitting in the audience, Irene watches and listens to her mother give the presentation. Irene will be the next woman to receive a Nobel Prize in Science in 1935. When Marie returns to Paris after receiving her second Nobel Prize, the headlines of a newspaper reads, "The invasion of foreigners." And then it goes on to say, the invasion has infiltrated the Sorbonne, the École Centrale, the Institut Pasteur, and the Faculty of Medicine everywhere. Foreigners at the Sorbonne, laboratories invaded by a mob mostly made up of foreign individuals. The number of women are constantly increasing. The most commendable of them are there because they are looking for husbands. End quote. The emphasis would have been better spent on the looming war, not the invasion of foreigners for science, but the invasion of Germans. And that ends this chapter 9. Thank you very much.